All right, everyone. Good morning again. Welcome back. We've got a few more minutes until it's 9, about 5 minutes. So good morning, and hope you're doing well. We will just take a few moments and then get this review session going. Oh, Taya, this is a different class. That midterm is for tomorrow, and it's a Tuesday midterm. So, Taya, our agreement is related to tomorrow's meeting. Can you hear me? Right, so you talked about taking it at 9:30 a.m. Tuesday. This is Monday. Are we on the same page, Taya? I'm teaching a class right now, but it starts at 9, so we have a few minutes. Taya, let me know if you can hear me. I see your message. Monday at 9 a.m.? Okay. All right. Let me mail it to you. I'll just send it to you right now. I thought we had agreed on Tuesday, but not to worry. It'll just take me 1 second, okay? Oh, no worries. Okay, Taya, I just sent it. I'd like you to just please give me confirmation here in the chat that you received it. Can you do that? Go ahead and just confirm. Hey, Drew, good to see you. A couple minutes and we'll get our meeting underway. Not to worry though, Taya, do let me know. Hey, Eva. Now, Taya, I'm sending it to the Canvas because you've been only sending me messages through Canvas. You've kind of avoided using your direct email, so I hope there's no issues with the way of it sending off to you, because when I'm trying to find your email address information, the only records in my inbox between our exchanges have been through notifications in Canvas. but I'm assuming that that did deliver it to you. It's always best not to use Canvas to send and receive messages. You should just use your regular email. But hey, Kelly. No, not to worry, but Taya, did you get it? Please confirm. I only have a few seconds here, so just let me know right now. You got it, right? You got the document? Not yet? Okay, send me an email with your actual email address so that I can quickly hit this reply button and send you your midterm form. Because it's not going to send the right way. The only messages you've been replying to have been Canvas announcements to the whole class. That's not a personalized email. I need your email address. Okay, thanks. Okay, not to worry. Then I just sent it off. Thanks so much, Tay. All right, everybody. Welcome back to class, and hope you guys had a great weekend. Sorry for a little bookkeeping I had there. There's a student from a different course, not at our institution, but that needed to take a midterm at a different time than what was scheduled because of a personal emergency, so therefore I had to sort that out. But it's all done. Thanks, guys, for being back. Now, today and Wednesday, we have 2 meetings that are just going to be dedicated to the review session of the midterm review guide. So we've got the study guide. Hopefully you guys have pulled it all up. What I'm looking at in my browser and other window on the desktop is the full list of study guide questions. So there's 43 of them there. And what I will do to create the test on Friday is to just take from this list something like 9 or so questions. And then you'll have to answer like 6 of them during the 50-minute window of class. So I'll give you about more like an hour pretty much, like from say 9 to 10. But then, yeah, you'll basically return your answers as an email attachment to me. Now, I'm almost done with the grading of the first essays. I'm just going to announce tomorrow morning in a class-wide announcement that you can just request your score. So do look for the email tomorrow morning. And then after that, anybody can simply send me an email and check in on their score for the first essay so you know how you're doing as we go into the first midterm. But anyway then, this is a review session. The way I like the review sessions to go whenever I conduct them is for them to be mostly student-driven. So that means that I would like for you guys to take a little more of a lead in terms of going over some of the information, but I'll help and I'll assist. I'll make sure that everything we talk about and say here is clear and accurate to the text and to the authors. But I'd like you to sort of direct me around the study guide, what you want to talk about on it, and help me with generating the information for the accurate responses. So with that, I invite you guys to just start going over whatever you see in the list. If you've got the list, if you don't have the list, pull it up. I sent it to you through Canvas last week in an announcement, so you can view, print, or download it there. And let's see here in the chat, which question do you want to start with? And then we'll just go from there. We'll try and cover as many of them as we possibly can in the time allotted, okay? So once I see number 7 about the Magico and Magican. Okay, good question, Eva. So question 7 says, explain Rose's example about Magican and Magico. So first of all, in terms of this question, what is the author and argument that's being discussed? someone can just get us started with that. Let's see what you've got. What author and argument is being discussed in that particular question from the study guide? Okay, waiting for you. I just need a little feedback, and then we can move to the next point in this explanation. Okay, William Rowe, why the ontological argument fails. Good, Jason. So Anselm argued that God must exist because he's defined as the greatest conceivable being. And if you're defined as the greatest conceivable being, you therefore have to exist, because to not exist in both the mind and reality would be less than perfect. It's greater to exist in both than to just exist in the mind. Now, what Rowe says is that that sounds a lot like Mr. Anselm is just defining God as an existing being, as though he says, here's the definition of God, perfect being which exists. So if you say this is not the case, that he doesn't exist, you're contradicting the definition itself. That's like saying the perfect existing being doesn't exist, which is logically contradictory. What Rowe is trying to argue is that you cannot prove something exists just on the basis that you define it as existing. Okay, now here's an example that is given to back that point up. Suppose that I invent these two words, magic can and magico. Now what does the word magic can mean by definition? Tell me that. In the author's essay, he provides the word magic can and defines it as what? A something, a what? A magician that exists, exactly, Senna. A magician that exists. A magico is a magician that does not exist. So in the camp of magic can, you've got like David Blaine, Chris Angel, Harry Houdini, real people that have performed magic tricks. In magico, there's like Merlin, Harry Potter, Gandalf, just fictional magicians. They're not real people. Okay, so here's the point. If there had never been actual magicians like Harry Houdini and David Blaine and so on, if there never were such people, then we would be in a universe where there's no such things as existing magicians, but we still could have invented the term magic can nonetheless. And it would still mean, according to the definition, magician that exists. So what you learn then is that just by defining something as existing is irrelevant to the actual question of whether there is such a thing in reality. There may be, there may not be, but the presence of the word which defines the thing as existing is not the proof of such a claim. So you have to kind of dig into that whole counterfactual supposition. Imagine there were not actual magicians, and yet the word had been established. Now, I also provided to you guys an alternative to his example, just so that you can maybe understand it a little easier, and that was unican versus unico. So in a similar way, we can define right now the word unican as existing unicorn. But no matter, it doesn't matter that we define it as existing unicorn, there still isn't any such thing. You know, so you understand then, the act of defining something as existing is not itself capable of proving that the thing defined as such does exist. Okay, so that's just one of the questions. Now here's something I thought might be a good idea. I've done this a few times in some of my classes, and I think it usually works pretty well. Today, since it's a review session, I thought maybe we can integrate and go dual platform. So here's what I basically am going to do. I'm going to continue allowing this YouTube live session to roll, and it's going to be recorded. So if you ever want to go back and watch the replay of it, you will still have it in the archive of the lectures. But I'm also going to run a Zoom meeting simultaneously so that anybody who wants to, like, say, see the screen share function and have the study guide projected on your computer screen, then you'll have it then. So here in the chat, do you see this link? Go ahead and click the link, and then we'll open a Zoom meeting. You can continue to have both windows open if you like. I'm going to do that, obviously, like I said, but I'll start using the other one, the chat function in Zoom and the screen share function in Zoom. So go ahead and click on that link, and I'll be right there with you as we go dual platform. Okay, so I see you guys here. Thanks. Continue to file in. And I'm just pulling up my study guide really fast. Okay, so here it is. Let me expand a bit. So we can all kind of have a common frame of reference, just while we do the study guide. Doing the screen share. Okay, I'm pulling the chat bubble up. So can anybody please just throw a few things in the chat so I can just make sure our functions are working and you can hear me? That'd be awesome. In the Zoom chat if you can. Thanks. Okay, good. Hi, guys. Cool. So, and not to worry, YouTube Live is still going, so people can also use that for later. Okay, we're back to the study guide. We've done number 7. You guys see here, question 7. So direct me to the next item. What do you think is next? It's not a lecture day. It's just talking about review. Do we type our questions in here? Yeah, Jason, use the Zoom chat if you guys can. Okay. We're all on the same screen. So what I'm seeing on the screen is what you guys are seeing on the screen. So right now, for the moment, we're doing this Zoom. Okay. And if you're on YouTube Live, please just click that link, switch to Zoom. I'm just using YouTube to archive and record this meeting right now. Okay, so number 4 and number 15. All right, let me just start with the first few that I see. All right, guys, let's take Cameron's question first, and then we'll get all the way up through number 14 if we can. Okay, so in that order, starting at number 4. It says, explain the method of argument known as reductio ad absurdum. Okay, so let's ask about this question number 4. Reductio ad absurdum, what type of argument is that? When you have a reductio argument. What's the method of argumentation used in reductio? You want to prove something is true. And so what's the first step? It's to reduce to absurdity, yes, Jason. But what is the way it's done? You want to prove some claim. So you go on and you start by assuming the what? Assume the contrary, assume the opposite of the claim that you want to prove. Okay. And then try to demonstrate that if that was true, would lead to some contradiction or absurdity. When you've done that, you've thus proven that your original intended claim is true. So, I don't know, suppose that I was dealing with somebody that's really kind of lost when it comes to what day it is of the week. And I tell them, hey, it's Monday. And they're like, no, it's not. Today's still Sunday. And I'm like, no, it's Monday. And they say, how do you know? And I'm like, okay, well, look, let's assume that you're correct and that it's not Monday, right? It's not Monday is what you're saying. So then you bring out your cell phone, you show them the date displayed on the home page, and it shows the time and date, and it shows Monday the 12th. So you're like, okay, you just said it's not Monday. Let's assume it's not. Then how do you explain this? According to what you're saying, this is a false reading on my phone. It's also a false reading on your phone and everyone else's phone, but that's absurd. So clearly, it is Monday. So, you know, it's just any case where you try and assume the contrary of what you want to prove, but then you can point out that that implies something ridiculous or absurd. This method was used in Anselm's ontological argument. It's used quite often in just argument and philosophy overall, but in Anselm's argument, he says God is too great to only exist in the mind. He has to exist in the mind and in reality. But suppose that he only did exist in the mind. Just suppose that, because he's trying to prove the opposite. He does not only exist in the mind, but suppose that he did. If he did, then he would not be as great as you could possibly conceive of. And therefore, the greatest conceivable being would not be as great as something, which is a contradiction. So he must exist in the mind and in reality. Okay, so there we go. Now number 15, as I'm scrolling down a bit, the problem of evil. Nagel's problem of evil. Okay, so that one, not too bad. Who in this chat could tell me something about the problem of evil? First of all, what's the whole point of the argument? The case is being made in that argument for what? In that argument, people are arguing for what? The problem of evil. Ernest Nagel, taking us back a little ways. If God did exist, there wouldn't be any evil in this world. Well, yes, that's the first premise of the argument, Eva. But when I ask what the argument's arguing for, I'm asking about the conclusion. Nonetheless, we could go through the line by line. If God existed, there would not be any evil in the world. Yes, that's the first premise, but not the whole argument. What's the rest of it? So yeah, that's right. That's where it begins. If God existed, there would not be any evil in the world. But, you know, I was trying to sort of just thematize the overall concept and point of the argument first. It's sort of a little bit out of context to tell us what the premises are if we're not sure what this whole point of the argument is. So what's the point of the argument? To those here, just understand that there's this phenomenon in psychology called the diffusion of responsibility, where you're in a group and you think everyone else in the group is going to take action, so you just wait for them to do it, and then nobody does it. This happens, it's called the bystander effect. Like, you know, someone's getting stabbed and everyone waits for someone else to intervene and nobody does anything. Okay, so I'm just mentioning that because you got to talk when I ask the questions, even if you think someone else is going to do it. If God did exist, there would not be evil in the world. Okay, Ethan, to refute the cosmological argument. No, it's not that. Well, he does try to refute the cosmological argument, but in a different section of his paper. So we got to get on the same page. What is the point of the problem of evil? It's easy enough to say it. It's a person who's trying to prove something. Prove what? Okay, let's see. That God does not exist. Okay, yes, that God does not exist. So how does the argument go? How is it trying to prove the non-existence of God? Problem of evil. Names should give you some memories. Problem of evil. What's going on in the argument? You got to tell me, because you got to know the answer. You've got plenty of time, though, so let's see what you know. And then when you give me some information, I can expand on it. But I can't just give you the information out of nowhere. I mean, I already lectured on it one time, so I want to help you remember it and represent it. So you've told me one correct thing. It's about the non-existence of God. Eva, you told me something about the first premise. Let's add more. Tell me the whole argument then. Somebody want to use their microphone? Is that what's throwing you off? It's too hard to type it. Is it to refute the fact that he will be omnibenevolent? Sure, but let's not present it as a question. I need assertions. Tell me the argument. Assert what the argument is. Either use your notes, the book, or your memory, or some combination of all three, and inform me. The problem of evil. If God existed, there would not be evil in the world. Yes, but that's the first premise. What's beyond that? The second premise of the argument. See, every argument contains premises, multiple premises, that lead to a conclusion. There's no such thing as an argument which is one sentence sitting there by itself. So you got one piece of it, but that's incomplete. If God existed, there would not be evil in the world. Okay. What's after that? Because there are things in the world that are evil, there's no God. Yeah, okay. Good. You kind of present the second premise and the conclusion as a single sentence, but that's all right. God can't be omniscient and omnibenevolent. Eva, well, God is omniscient and omnibenevolent if he exists. That's the definition of God, of course. He has to be omniscient and omnibenevolent if he exists. But what that would mean is that if he's a perfect being, perfectly good and perfectly powerful, he would not allow for there to be evil, because he could stop it and he would want to stop it with all the goodness and all the power that he has, unlimited in nature. So if God existed, there would not be evil in the world. But there is evil in the world. Second premise. We didn't forget that, right? There's evil in the world. So what's the conclusion? That therefore there's no God. Now you'd have to give explanation and discussion of all the premises. You have to say, why is it that they claim that if God existed, there would not be evil in the world? It's because it's supposed to be contradictory to his perfect goodness and his perfect omnipotence. So if there's a being with all the power and perfectly good, he'd have the means and the will to stop evil, so it wouldn't exist. But looking at the world, there's evil in it. And therefore, there must not be this perfectly good and perfectly powerful God. It's not concluding, Eva, that there's God, but he's just not as powerful and good as we thought. Because there's no such thing as a God that's not perfectly powerful and good. If that's the case, then there's just no God at all. Okay, so let's continue. I'm going back up in the list to try and get the questions mentioned. So someone asked about number 27. Okay, so Jason, can we go over 27? From what I remember, Kant said the shopkeeper who thought about scamming the kid was moral for some reason, but I wasn't exactly sure why. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about 27 here. The shopkeeper example. So this example is supposed to be pointing out to us the two different possible motives that can cause a person to do an action. Now, he distinguishes between the motive of blank and the motive of other blank. What are the two things I'm referring to here? Kant says, for your action to have moral value, it has to be done on a certain type of motive and not done on a certain other type of motive. So what is a moral motivation that gives a person's action moral value? And then we can talk about this example, which is an illustration of the point. So we distinguish between the motive of such and such and the motive of what? Cameron, goodwill, no. Well, duty to uphold the moral law, yes. So there's the motive of duty. Motive of duty is one of the motives. And the other motive is inclination. Correct. Okay. Now, which of those two motives is the one which will give an action moral value? Duty. Good. Now, in the shopkeeper example, we imagine the patron of the shop comes up like a little child. They come up and they ask, how much does an item cost? And it's the shopkeeper's decision. Is he going to tell the truth about the price, or is he going to lie so that he can get more money from the child who purchases it? Now, if he gives a fair price, he might do it even though he doesn't feel like doing it. He feels like ripping the kid off. So what is an inclination? An inclination is doing something because it pleases you or because you desire to do it. So what his inclination would be in this situation is to rip the kid off, let's imagine. But despite that desire, imagine that he forces himself to do the right thing anyway, just because he knows that duty calls, and that's what morality commands that he does. So if he gives the fair price, even though he's full of thoughts that he would rather not, then he's doing it simply from duty, giving the fair price. We can also imagine another scenario in which a different shopkeeper gives the fair price, but does it out of love, or does it out of fear that he will be exposed as having sold something at an inflated rate. If the motive behind giving the fair price is supported by his self-interest or desire, then it's done out of inclination rather than duty, and therefore it no longer has moral value. So basically, I think Kant wants to tell us that when you do something that has moral value, it really should only be credited as moral if it was something difficult for you to do that didn't really please you, that you were not already inclined to do independently. So the clearest case of doing something from the motive of duty is when you are disinclined to do what morality requires, and you nonetheless hold yourself to a moral standard, even though it doesn't feel good and you derive no benefit from it at all. Okay, so there we have discussion of question 27 there, Jason. So Eva, you talked about 14 now. Nagel's critique of religious experience as a source of evidence for God's existence. Okay, so in Nagel's article, Does God Exist?, he tried to provide these criticisms of the various arguments that God does exist. He took us through his criticisms of the big three, the cosmological, the ontological, and the design argument. And then at the end, he mentions a couple of other miscellaneous arguments for God's existence that he also briefly discusses and also rejects. One of them was the argument from religious experience, or he sometimes also calls it the argument from mystical experience. So first of all, to understand the critique, you'll want to tell us what the argument is in the first place. So what is this so-called argument from religious experience for God's existence? Who can tell me, just, you know, don't have to give like a full breakdown, but if you give anything even brief, just something true about the question. What is the argument from religious experience overall based on? How is that argument trying to show God exists? An experience, well, you're talking about the objection already, Senna, which is good, but it's a little fast. First and foremost, the argument itself is claiming what? That God must exist, and why? The person who gives the argument, before we step to the criticism, the one that states this argument is claiming God exists on the basis of what reason? So by giving the objection, Senna, that means you must know the argument itself too. So what is the reason stated in such an argument that God exists, according to the claim? Because they've had a spiritual experience with God. Yes, correct, Anthony. So the argument from religious experience is really just the person who says, I had a powerful experience which showed me that God existed. He revealed himself to me somehow. Maybe a miracle was performed in my life. Maybe I had a transcendent moment of communion with God. Maybe I felt like the Spirit of God touched me somehow, and because of that, after the experience, whatever it was, fill in the blank, there's a lot of possibilities, near-death experiences, birth of a child, you know, who knows. But based on that experience, the person now comes away saying, there's definitely a God, and the experience showed that to me. Now, what's the criticism Nagel's pointing out? It's kind of what you said there, Senna. An experience is something that cannot be made available for other people to look at and to inspect. You know, so the best evidence that could convince a skeptic is evidence they can also perceive. But with an experience, it's locked away in your own memories and in your own private experience. Therefore, it's not capable of being put forward to share and be evaluated by others. So that's one problem, yes, that these experiences, these religious experiences, are private to the one who had them, and they can't be made public. The other issue is that there's also a way of explaining the claimed experiences without any supernatural basis. A person could say the one who made the claim that they saw God or that they had a religious experience was on drugs, or was going through mental illness, or was, in the midst of powerful emotional states. So whatever it is, there's ways of trying to explain those without the presence of God. And therefore, because there's these alternate explanations and the experiences can't be shared, Nagel concludes that they're not the most convincing of all arguments. Now, Drew, did Nagel put forth this religious argument and then draw objections to it? Yes, it's in the latter 2 pages of the article by Nagel. He just states the argument, and then he did present these objections to it. That's right. So good. Thank you for that one. I think that's pretty much sums it up. So we go on. I'm going back up here to see your additional questions. 29, categorical imperative. Okay. So thank you for the question there. Just making sure. Got it. Page. All right. So yeah, now, what do you guys think about that one? Let me know. The categorical imperative. So this is the moral principle that is the sort of core of Immanuel Kant's philosophy. So Kant, the famous German philosopher of the 18th century, he said that if you want to live morally and not violate the moral law, then you have to always act in accordance to the categorical imperative. So there were 2 versions of the categorical imperative, and the categorical imperative is supposed to be this rational principle which can reveal what the moral law commands or forbids a person from doing. So then, what's the first version of the categorical imperative? It's a statement which tells you how you should always act. So, act always, says Megan, so that the maxim which describes your action could be willed to be a universal law. Good. Now that is like the verbatim statement of it, but it requires a little analysis too. Tell me what that means. What does it mean to act according to a maxim that could be a universal law? If you can say that in other words somehow. You can say what that obligates or what that forbids. What that says in a way is that you must never do an action that couldn't be what? So act always so it could be a universal law. Never act in a way so the action couldn't be a universal law. So give me a way of thinking about that in another summary statement. That's a good starting point. Yes, that's a clear, direct statement of the actual categorical imperative version 1. But the professor needs to know that the student hasn't just memorized a string of words and that they understand the underlying meaning behind the words, so that you couldn't just, let's say, regurgitate verbatim without knowing the meaning. So act so that others would be able to do so as well. I remember the cutting in line example. Good, Jason. So the maxim itself just states the personal policy of one person. The universal law version of it is when you restate the personal maxim as a universal principle. So if my maxim is, I will cut a line when the line is long, then that universal law becomes all persons will cut lines when the lines are long. But if everyone did so, then there would no longer be a line to cut. Furthermore, the one that cuts would not benefit from universal cutting because their own act of cutting would be invalidated by all the others doing the same. So that's an action that's based on a bad maxim that cannot be made to a universal law, and therefore it's immoral to do it. And any action is immoral according to this principle if it could not be done universally by all when you consider it as a universal law. So like if I don't pay a tip or something after I eat a meal, my maxim might be, I will not pay a tip when I eat. When I eat, I won't pay a tip. If that's the universal law, no one pays tips, and then the servers and so forth are not compensated, and therefore they can no longer provide the service, which establishes the necessity of a tip. So some actions only are going to even work, even in theory, if they're done by a few people, some people, but never by all. So actions that cannot be universalized cannot be made into laws, and therefore they're wrong morally. Riding the subway without paying the toll can't be done by everybody and still have a functioning system. Lying when you request a loan cannot be done universally by 100% of people and still have loans. Okay, so that's just the way the first version works. But there's two versions of the categorical imperative. And if the question was asked, you'd want to report on both. So I want to quickly ask then, what's version 2 of the same categorical imperative? What's that? So version 2 doesn't talk about maxims and laws. Instead, it talks about how you should treat human beings. So it talks about how you should never treat a human being. What does that say, version 2? Never treat a human being, how? Never treat them as a means to an end, exactly. So that means never to use someone as a tool to achieve a goal that you have got. So don't manipulate, exploit people in the pursuit of whatever the goals you may be. Honora O'Neill, so this kind of touches on her question, which is number 30. What it means to treat someone as a mere means, according to her, is to involve someone in an interaction that they would not or could not consent to. So if you do something with or to another person, and their role in the whole interaction is something that they would not have chosen on their own free will, if they knew their role in the interaction, then you're doing something wrong. So robbing from a person violates their ability to choose whether or not they want to give you that item. You know, like any action, like if I ride in the carpool lane while everybody else follows the rules, even though I'm driving by myself, I'm doing something that the others who are following the rule wouldn't have consented to allowing me to do if they knew what I was doing under full information. So lying, cheating, stealing, exploitation of all forms would violate the second version of the categorical imperative. So if and when other people are going to be useful to you in a way that's that's morally permittable, you have to just make sure that they consent to their role in the interaction without any kind of coercion, fraud, or deception. Okay, so we've talked there about both versions of the categorical imperative. The first batch of requested topics we've gone through, but there's plenty of time and more questions still and another meeting also, so let's go to the next. You tell me 31. Okay, so question 31 asks you, the student, to supply an example of an action, one action, that would be described as wrong in one theory and required and obligatory in another. So we've really only looked at a couple of different moral theories. Maybe you can remember or just generate an example of an action like that. So what could be an action that the two moral theories would disagree about? One of them saying you should, the other saying no. So you say trolley and the surgeon example, Cameron, and I can sort of see what you mean, but one issue though is that those are two different situations, not one. So let's just focus on one. One action and two theories. So which action do you think we should choose? You've given an option there that would work, but you gave two things and you should only have one. So what do you think? What could be an example here? And just let's go through the reasons why the two theories would not agree about the diagnosis of what's right or wrong there. Very close, but let's restate that one time. Well, burning car example. It's not a perfect case actually, Jason, because with the burning car, Kant's moral philosophy doesn't say you're obligated to assist the person in the car. It just says that it's not wrong if you did do so with a motive that was a good motive. So you could say that in utilitarian theory, which only cares about consequences, this was bad. But in the Kantian theory, it doesn't go as far as saying you're obligated to assist the person. It just says that you may do so and it would not be immoral even if the consequences were unfavorable. This question is asking you something slightly different, which is in one case it's wrong and in the other case you must do it, not that you're permitted to do it. Ethan, here you have a good one, surgeon example. So just thinking about that transplant case, which of the two theories between utilitarianism and Kantianism would say that this is okay to do. I guess you say it there, Ethan. It's permissible under utilitarianism to kill the one to save the five, at least a very strict version of extreme utilitarianism, because in doing that, five survive and one dies, which generates a greater net total of life saved than if you decline to do it, in which case five die and one lives, with all the lost total happiness across life that those five lives amount to. But it would be wrong to do it in Kant's system. Tell me why, though, since we've talked a little about Kant just now. Why would Kant's moral philosophy say that it's not okay to kill the one patient to save the five with their organs? You need to give me the reason there. Because you'd be using that person's life to save the others, and yeah, then you'd be using them as a means to an end, which is never permissible no matter how good the end may be in Kant's philosophy. You could also give a case, just any case at all, where more utility could be generated, but only by doing something that cannot be universalized, or could only be generated by doing something that uses a person as a means to an end. So like a Robin Hood type example. If I steal from the rich, give to the poor, maybe I create more total happiness on balance. So a utilitarian might say it's not bad. But a Kantian would say you're using the victim of the robbery or theft as a means to the end of the redistributed wealth, and that's not okay because a person can't be used as a means. Now you give the trolley loop example, Drew, but you got to be careful with these examples because, let me think. In the case of loop, if the guy flips the switch, it hits the big guy, the trolley does, and it stops it from going around. But everybody seems to believe that that's not immoral. I guess you could sort of say that if you're a strict utilitarian, that's not, that the reason that it's not immoral is just because there's one dead instead of five. And that to a Kantian it is wrong because it treats the person as a means. But I think that discussion of the trolley problem with two cases mentioned together, like loop versus transplant, it could complicate it somewhat. But I guess that's a fair example, to be honest. Yeah, in the loop case, one intuition would argue that you should flip the switch because you're just going to hit one instead of five. But to a Kantian, maybe it's not okay because it uses the one guy as a means. The thing, though, is this Kantian intuition about not using the one guy as a means doesn't really affect most people who are surveyed about the loop scenario. Because most people's overall reaction to that loop scenario is go ahead and flip the switch and just don't allow the trolley to hit five people and kill them. The solution to the problem, according to Thompson, has more to do with whether it's the same threat that is rediverted from a bigger to a smaller group, and not so much about whether it obviates the categorical imperative. Because notwithstanding the intuitions of Kant's categorical imperative, most people don't really find this to be wrong. So I don't know. I was about to give you another example, though, because you don't need to generate these examples so closely from the textbook. You're like, where in the book is the example? Think in your head and just in the world. Any situation, I was talking about, like if someone steals from one person to give more money to others, they treat that person as a means, but it could lead to more utility. And that would be another situation where the two theories would not agree. Or, I don't know, let's see, we could have a situation where the Kantian would say that you must do it and the utilitarian would say it's wrong. That would be a case where like telling a promise and keeping the promise has to be done according to Kant. But in utilitarian land, if keeping the promise causes more harm than good, then you should break it. So there you could imagine a situation where promise keeping is what Kant requires, but promise breaking is probably better for everybody. Or lying, another one. In Kant's philosophy, you may never lie, even if the consequences of telling the lie would be great. But we can easily imagine or dream up situations where the lie would produce more benefit than telling the truth. So that would be a case where the utilitarian would say your obligation is to lie, and the Kantian would say your obligation is to tell the truth. Okay, so Megan, can we go over number 33? So yeah, 33. Why does Singer say that the problem of global hunger is not a problem of scarcity of resources? Good question. So who knows about that? In Peter Singer's paper, Rich and Poor, he says, I don't want anybody to think that we can decline any obligation to assist the poor just because there's not enough food for everyone and therefore there's always going to be scarcity and it can't be fixed. He says this is not true. The problem is not so much about scarcity. So what is it about then? why do we have global hunger if it's not just the fact that there's too many people and not enough food to produce? What does he think the real problem is if it's not just about scarce resources? Inefficient use of resources and waste. That's correct, Jason. So you'd have to, discuss that just a bit. Waste in the Western world, and especially in America, which has a very strong consumer culture, we do waste a lot of food and consumable resources that go into the landfill, either because we buy or produce more than we can eat. That's one source of inefficiency. The other thing is inefficient use, maldistribution of the available resources. Well, he does say that Eva, well, no, hold on, wait, hold on. Let's not get confused, Eva. Peter Singer believes we need to help the poor. I think maybe you're thinking of Garrett Hardin, so let's not confuse one person with another. Peter Singer says we have to help the global poor because we have way more money than we need. They don't have enough to even eat and sleep and have clothes and so on. So when we have surplus wealth and they have deficiency of available resources to provide the basic needs, he thinks we have an obligation to assist, and if we don't, it could even be somewhat comparable to killing. Now, the point being discussed here is Singer's pushback to any claim that the problem of global poverty and hunger cannot be solved because it's a scarcity of available resources. He says it's not about scarcity, and I was explaining that it's about rather waste and inefficient use. So we talked about why waste is one factor. Inefficient distribution of resources has to do with the heavy reliance on animal agriculture and the meat-based diet in the West. So that diverts so many consumable resources to cattle and livestock that could more efficiently be given directly to human beings, such that if there was less reliance on animal agriculture, it would generate so much surplus consumable resources for people that we could feed an even larger global population than what we have now. So we cannot, therefore, he says, claim that doing nothing is fine because it's futile to try. It's not literally impossible or inconceivable for there to be enough food for all the people who need to eat. The reason there's not enough has to do more with what we waste and the way that we allocate resources. But it's not because it's impossible to generate all that food. Okay, so one thing has to do with the reliance on animal agriculture, and the other thing he talked about was just waste. I can open the book really quick on that if you want to just hear some quick reference to it. Okay. Sorry, I gotta go back a bit. Yeah, he says here, sorry, I'm just trying to find the relevant passage. Yeah, on page 140 in the left, the problem is not that the world cannot produce enough food and shelter for its people. People in poor countries consume on average 180 kilos of grain a year, while North Americans average around 900 kilos. The difference is caused by the fact that in rich countries, we feed most of our grain to animals, converting it into meat, milk, and eggs. Because this is a highly inefficient process, people in rich countries are responsible for the consumption of far more food than those in poor countries who eat few animal products. If we stopped feeding animals on grains and soybeans, the amount of food saved would, if distributed to those who need it, be more than enough to end hunger throughout the world. So a little bit of discussion from the author there. But anyways, we can go on. What's next in terms of questions here? Number 39, okay. So Tragedy of the Commons from Garrett Hardin. So flipping now the script to a totally opposite perspective, Garrett Hardin, you guys understand, argues that we don't have an obligation to assist the global poor, and that he argues even counterproductive to try. But along the way of making his argument, he presented this notion called the tragedy of the commons. So one statement of the tragedy of the commons is easy enough to provide. What is it? The tragedy of the commons says that there's a certain type of thing that's always bound to fail, but what is it and why? Maybe then we can say more from there. What things just never work out according to the tragedy of the commons? Public resources, good. Public resources, so what are those? Those are things that are available for people to own in common and to share as a public resource. So why do they not work out? What's wrong with public resources? Why shouldn't they be sustainable? Okay, so lack of maintenance, yes, and then excessive usage is the other point, right? So he gave an example of and one point before I continue there. Unlike private resources, right? With privately owned resources, the private owner or owners neither overtax their resource by using more of it than they can, and they also maintain it and try and make sure that it's sustainable. So public resources fail, but private resources last. That's the overall position. He gives the example of an acre of farmland. He says if 1 acre of land was opened up to the public, well, it's not going to last very long because with public availability, everyone will use it. So it'll have too many animals on it, it'll be overgrazed, and it'll quickly be ruined. Therefore, after a little while, the 1 acre can't be used by anybody. Because again, everyone will come to use it, so it'll be excessively used, but nobody will have a matching feeling of personal responsibility to it since it's not their personal property. It'll be overutilized, poorly maintained, and quickly ruined. But if it was privately owned acre of land, the owner of that 1 acre is not going to overload it because why should they? It would be to their detriment since they've invested their own money and wealth into it. They don't want it to be ruined, and therefore they'll take proper care not to overload it. And also they would clean and maintain so that it is viable and sustainable into the future. Because if not, then they made an investment in a product that they ended up destroying and getting no value out of it. So private ownership, he thinks, is good and likely to last. But things that are turned into commons, as he calls them, public resources, they fail. And he is thinking in the background of the World Food Bank when he makes this argument, because he thinks that that's another program which establishes a commons for access to consumable resources in the third world. But like all commons, he judges that there will be heavy use of the resource, but no effort to make it sustainable by weaning themselves off of it over time. Rather, he thinks it would simply bloat and expand the population of those nations which draw from it until such time as they become too large in number to be further supported, and then we would have an even bigger problem then. So that's his tragedy of the commons, the example he gave, and the larger point that he's making by means of it. Interesting, something in the news about the World Food Bank. I think it won some type of major humanitarian prize just this year or something, but yeah, you'll find a headline maybe if you go and Google that. Anyway, so that's information, I guess, for number 39. And let me make another mention of something that I believe I said last week, but I want to repeat it. When you're generating your sample answers and you're looking at the study guide and getting your thoughts clear and keeping your notes ready for the exam on Friday, you just have to make sure that you work independently on that. I do not want people to collaborate in the writing of responses. People can talk about what they're doing, they can talk about the concepts and all of that, but nobody can submit answers that look like they use the same language or that they just modify a couple of words to somehow skirt around this requirement, because everyone has to work hard on their own and nobody can ride the coattails of others. Therefore, if I see 2 answers in any student responses that are verbatim the same, that's not okay, and they're not going to get the credit the student wants. So you don't have anything to worry about if you're working on your own, because then nobody can plagiarize your work and vice versa. Okay, but back to the list. We have a little bit of time. There's only like 3 minutes. So if you have a quick question, maybe 36, okay. Well, that's a big question in a way, 36. His response to 2 of the differences between killing and failing to assist. So in Singer's article, he did think that someone might argue killing and failing to assist are different. And he mentions 5 possible differences between those things. So in question 35, they ask you about what the differences could be. And in 36, they ask how he responds to them. Well, one difference is a difference of motive. Another difference is a difference of certainty of the outcome. Another one is level of difference in identifiability of the victim. It's not hard to save all the lives that you can. Sorry, it's not hard to avoid killing, but it's hard to save all the lives that you can. And then you can always say it's not my fault that they're poor, which you could not say in the case of killing. Those are the differences. Now, how does he respond to them? Well, it says to give his response to 2. And therefore, you have options. There's 5 points. You reply to 2 of them in whatever case that you think is the easiest one to report on. So he says, for example, about certainty and motivation, that a drunk driver doesn't have the evil motive of a homicidal driver, and they're also not as likely to hit somebody as a homicidal driver. So when it comes to certainty and motive, the drunk driver is not as bad, I guess, as the homicidal driver, but that doesn't remove all the blame, though. It's still bad and wrong for the drunk driver to get behind the wheel, even if they don't intend harm, and even if it's not as likely to cause harm as if they were trying to do it on purpose. So once again, what that could make clear to us is that when you fail to assist, you may not be trying to hurt people, and it may not even be as likely to hurt anybody as if you had gone to like the third world and started shooting at poor people. But still, it's to some extent wrong because it adds additional risk, and it knowingly does so, even if the realization of the risk is not the intended aim of the subject who takes the action. So the failure to assist on a par with the drunk driving case is still to some extent wrong. He also gave responses to the other three. But maybe if you want, we can pick up, Megan, on that when we resume on Wednesday. Are we meant to turn our sample answers from the study guide to you, or is it just for us? I'm a little confused. Good question, though. Let me think. You know, you're really supposed to write the answers on the day of the test. The preparation that you have in advance, I mean, in a way, it's a distinction without a difference, I suppose, but you don't know which questions that I will pick. So unless you want to write out 43 full-form answers, it's best to just have, you know, some bullet point notes and things on the different questions that you want to respond on, and then to write it out for real on the day of the test when you have the timed window. But if you have longer responses that you're going to prepare in advance, you know, you can hang on to them and then submit them when you take the test. From the study guide to you, or is it just for us? Yeah, so no, I mean, I don't, but here's what I don't want. I don't want and I won't accept like 43 written responses from anybody. The test itself is going to just be asking you about 6 of these questions, but you just don't know which ones, nor do I, because it's a last minute decision I make when I create the test form on the day of. All we know is that the questions are going to come from this list. So the more preparation you have, like looking at the questions, taking notes on them, maybe having some sample responses, the better you'll be. You will submit it through Outlook email, correct, Drew? Yes, it'll be an email attachment, just like how you sent me your first essays. All right, guys, so I guess I'll let you go. We've got to move on to our next meetings today. Do we answer in the email? Well, no, I was going to say attach a file, like you attached your essay as a file. But I mean, I guess if a student was not able to attach a file properly and they were running out of time, then, you know, I'll accept whatever submission they give me. If they do put it in the body of an email, then I'll work with it. Okay, so I'm going to stop the screen share and end our Zoom meeting and the YouTube Live back to back. So for Zoomers, see you guys on Wednesday, and thanks for your help today. I'm ending this meeting, and then I'm ending the other one. So see you guys soon. And over here. Okay, and there's still a couple of you guys on this stream. So anyway, I'm closing this one now too, the YouTube Live. You can come back to this to view the discussions that we've had. Notice I'm not writing a bunch of notes because I just want to cover the material fast. We have a lot of them, but since you have a recorded version, you can always use that as a reference. All right, thanks again, everyone, and just have a good day. I'll see you soon.